Hey guys, this is Bart Hansen from Crush Live Poker. I'm going to put up a full-length training video that we recorded a few days ago from Crush Live Poker up here onto YouTube. If you really want to watch a live stream that sort of mimics what actual live play is in normal casino settings, you can take a look at the link that I have in the description that sends you to Jacksonville Best Bet. I don't normally do these full length training videos and put them up on YouTube maybe once a year, but I thought this was a really good set of hands that can sort of show you what a typical live game is and how I break them down. Also, check out the link in the description if you want to check out Crush Live Poker for the first 2 months for half off. Just click on that link. If you play low stakes live, this is going to be right in your sort of groove, right up your alley, because the skill level in this game is just really something for a 2-5 game. I mean, it almost plays like a 1-2, and it's different than some of the stuff that we see at Hustler, which is like kind of a lot of splashy, aggressive play, and I think a lot of people can't relate to it because of the amount of money, whereas here, I think you can definitely relate to it. I think I'm going to go over like 6 or 7 hands of this first guy, and this is what I'm talking about here. This is just typical stuff here. This is the guy, we're going to call him Joe, here in the cutoff, and he is the guy. He's got a Warriors hat on. He's the guy that emailed me in that he was playing. This was taken from mid-June, and you can see the stack sizes are accurate here. So obviously people can buy in for more than 1,000. So that's what we're going to be taking a little bit out of the perspective. There's a few hands here that I think kind of an interesting clump of whether or not to double barrel against sort of loosey-goosey multi-way calling players and what I would do in a given situation, which I think comes up quite a bit, especially in the games that you play. So let's get into it here. This 2-5. So open limp here from the cutoff, and we've got our subscriber here who's going to bump it up on the button, which is obviously a very good play. And he's taking the 5x sizing, which I like. I would probably just straight open a 4x as I do in Texas, and I probably would in any $5 blind game. By the way, too, I just heard that today New Hampshire raised the cap in their games to 2,000. So there's a 5-10 2,000 game in New Hampshire, which is obviously going to be great for me. I live right in between New Hampshire and the Encore Boston Harbor, which Encore Boston Harbor has also extended their hours, but they're still closed Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is really something, with a $10 rake, 10% up to $10. So Joe here opens to 25 over the top of a limp, which is definitely, I really like to play. Again, if one person limps in, I will raise it up, ignoring the limp. If more than one person limps in, usually 2 or more, I will sort of take hands that I would open with from early position. That's my approach. Here, we see that this guy, I believe it's showing that this guy is, okay, so the cutoff, it goes I'm sorry, under the gun limp, which is hijack, cutoff opens. What I was going to say is that if another guy had limped in and then this guy had over limped, Jack 10 suited, I would probably raise anyways, because that's a hand that I probably would raise in position. Sometimes though, I will take some suited connectors and raise over 2 people as well if I do think I'm going to get some folds. But then once it definitely gets to 3, that's really where I'll start over limping, and then really only raise hands that I would open from the first few positions anyways, which is probably like 7s plus 8s, maybe something like that. I start to overlimp 6s, some of the small pairs, some of the, sort of playable suited connectors, like a 4-5 suited or something like that. So we've got a call here from the button with 8-9 off, and you can just see these guys are all over the place, right? So our hero here, Joe, with the Jack 10 suited, and he's got 2 people here. He's in the middle, and he's going to flop a flush draw here on an ace-high board, which is obviously a fairly good type of scenario, and it comes out ace-5-5 with a couple spades. And, in some of these games, just because someone didn't raise preflop doesn't mean that they don't have an ace. And sort of a, if you want to take like a theoretical approach to preflop, if everyone was sort of playing well, there really shouldn't be an open limp there anyways. But you would tend to discount somebody having an ace in a non-3 bet pot. Now, obviously, the guy in the button can flat with some suited aces and stuff too, but to flop a flush draw on an ace high board here with a paired low card is a really, really good position to be in. The pot is 75, and Joe takes a $40 sizing here. This is where I might go exploitable here with a little bit of bluffs and sizing, where if I had an ace, I'd go larger. And sometimes with a bluff, you can just go smaller. I mean, I think you could probably get away with betting 25 or 30 here. You are the one that has the spades, and it's just really hard for anybody to call here without just an ace. I mean, I suppose people could take one off of like sixes and sevens, like if you went really small. So he is a little bit larger than I would have. He goes 40. And this guy here check calls with ace deuce off. Now we know that he has ace deuce off because it says it. I almost don't believe it with basically what ends up happening here on the turn. The turn here is an 8. And what I will say here, because this is from something what I saw in some later hands with this guy, I would probably one and done these types of scenarios. I would not be doing a whole lot of double barreling here, especially if I took the kind of a larger sizing on the flop. So if you take a larger sizing on the flop, you don't do as much double barreling, especially if you're bluffing. If I took a smaller sizing where people might be a little bit wider calling, you might be able to get on board with double barreling here. But in all honesty, this guy really should have an ace or a 5, and the only thing that double barreling here is going to do is get a hand like 4s, 7s, 6s, which they would have to open limp with anyways here from the cutoff to fold. So I probably would not double barrel here. I probably would not double barrel. And again, the reason why I question the graphics is because this guy's going to fold really, really quickly, which is kind of shocking to me from what I saw later on. So I don't know if those graphics are correct. This guy betting 80 here on ace 5, 5, 8, and this guy just check folding ace deuce. Obviously we're never going to be in here with ace deuce off, but somehow if we had opened limped with ace deuce suited or we had called in the big blind, you're absolutely not supposed to fold here to a turn double barrel for a half pot size bet. I mean, that is ludicrous. Usually what we'll see though is people calling far too much, not over folding. So that's kind of a little bit of an outlier, but I probably would not double barrel in that particular spot. By the way, if you want to watch this entire episode, this is the June 16th episode of Jacksonville. The issue with Jacksonville's sort of YouTube setup is that it is not really all that well organized, I would say. So it's really hard to sort of find, they don't really title them, and unless you're looking at the specific date, you have to sort of click in there and look at the players. And Jacksonville's been around for quite some time. It's just they seem to just kind of run their live stream and they don't get a whole lot of viewers, even though they do have some big games on there like 5-10, things like that. So, just Jacksonville Best Bet you can put up on YouTube. So next hand here. So here we've got a limp in here from this guy from under the gun. And our hero here is in +2. This is about an hour and 30 minutes into the show, so gets a little bit more long-handed. By the way, the chips are sort of standard black, 100s greens, 25s reds, 5s, and Joe here is going to raise it up and add it to 25 here with queen 10 of hearts, which obviously is great. And again, in a game like this, even at 1,000, I mean, I'd be probably trying to encourage straddles. If you heard me talk about this on the podcast about 6 months ago, sure, it's going to make the SPRs smaller, and your stacks aren't that deep, but you're still playing against a bunch of bad players. So anytime you're going to double the stakes, you're going to win more. So if there's anything you could do to encourage straddling, a round of straddle, something like that, I would definitely do it. So we get this guy in here in the big blind who makes the call, and this guy, Big Wiggly, is also going to limp call here, and we'll see it 3 ways. So it's not a bad little spot here for Joe in this particular situation. And we get a raggedy board here of 5 deuce 3. So it's 5 deuce 3 rainbow. And, Joe's got a backdoor heart draw. I mean, the only thing that I would say here is that because the big blind is in here, he can definitely be completing a lot wider, and this guy certainly was, although Joe did make it 5x and he wasn't closing the action. It's not a terrible board here to c-bet. A lot of people are going to miss. you actually do need to get some of the suited broadways out. The only thing about these wheel type boards is that, remember, any type of ace high is going to be a gut shot, and anything with ace 6 or better is 2 overcards and a gut shot. So a lot of people are going to piece off in those spots with those hands. So he's got a backdoor hard draw. If he wants to bet like a hand like, Queen 10 suited, do it with the backdoor. He goes sort of halfish pot here to 35. And even though we can see that Mr. Bickles has absolutely nothing here, he calls next to act, which should be stronger. So when he calls next to act with a guy behind him, even though we can see this is absolutely ridiculous that he's in there, that is a slightly stronger range than the under the gun. So I think I would be double barreling a little bit less here. Now the turn's a 5. And what I would say here is because of that sort of next to act call, I probably wouldn't have double barreled here a whole lot. I mean, think about what you would do also too, if you ever have aware players, would you be betting this particular card with an overpair? Would you be betting it with ace high all that much on the turn? If the answer is no, I think that double barreling like a hand like Queen 10 suited, it's very easy to overbluff in this particular spot. If a guy's got a pair, he's not going to fold. He can have 5x. And it's debatable whether or not he is sometimes even going to fold out like ace jack, ace queen, ace 10. So even though the results here are going to work out for Joe, where he sort of goes half pot again, which is kind of a weird sizing because usually in theory on the turn, you're going to be using like a variable 1/3 sizing or a large sizing for your sizing here on the turn. Even though this got through, I'm kind of not a huge fan of the double barrel. So we just saw the first hand where supposedly the guy check folded an ace, which I still can't believe looking at all the hands in this lineup. And then here, a double barrel that just doesn't to me make a whole lot of sense. So we ended up winning both of these hands through aggressive play, even though I actually wasn't that big of a fan of either double barrel. So I'm definitely not going to be results oriented here in this video. All right, moving along here about 25 minutes later at 1:56 of this June 16th episode. Gonna get involved here with this guy who once again limps in from the hijack. You can see here he's got the queen jack off, and Joe's gonna raise it up to 25. So very similar to the first hand, but more long-handed, more people in the pot, and perfectly reasonable isolation raise here against somebody who's open limping, which seems like constantly from late position, and the pot is $57. And here we go again with one of these, you could say kind of like one and done types of hands here, except this one is heads up in this spot, and the other one, Joe bet into 2 people, which is a little bit stronger. Here, there's also no flush draw, but there's really no straight draw out there as well. Now, a reasonable check call range in this particular spot would pretty much have to be an ace, an 8, or if somebody had limped in with like some sort of pair above, say 6s, 7s, something like that, if that's even possible. So you probably don't have to bet all that much here with king jack. And sometimes you can even check. And the reason why I'm saying that sometimes you can check is that you have the non-nut pair. So if you really wanted to look at this like in an extreme sort of fashion, if an ace is never going to fold, and the only thing that's calling your bet here pretty much is an ace, then there isn't a whole lot of need to bet because you're really not getting anything better to fold. And only better is really continuing, with the exception maybe, like I said, maybe of possibly getting some small pairs to fold. But even if that is the case, you certainly can make a case for betting for protection here, where you're just basically not allowing a free card to come off. And when you do bet for protection, you can go very small. So I think that you could probably get away with 20 here, something like that. Now he goes 25, and this is where we see this guy call, and this is why I sort of would think that there's a fair chance that ace deuce offhand was a misread, but who knows? So turn is a 3, and now it goes check, check. Now, it's possible that Joe might have checked this back different from the spade hand because, again, he's got sort of the no pair. But once it goes check, call, even if once in a while the guy has like a small pair type of holding, most of his holdings should be like ace X or he's slow playing an 8. So this is another double barrel spot that's, a little bit intricate, and I'm a fan of not double barreling here once again. So this is a non-double barrel spot for the most part for me. Check, check. And now the river is a 5, and this guy comes out and he bets 55. Now, who knows if Joe, I don't know what the setup is. I don't remember in Jacksonville, like if you're privy, like if you can get sort of reports. Sometimes you can't do that at Hustler because they take all your phones. But when we were playing at TCH and Lodge, I'd have a spotter. Like Mike G would be watching, and he could send me stuff. It's on an hour delay. So if you were in a situation where you were playing a live stream and someone's like, wow, this guy folded ace deuce in that first hand when you double barreled, I suppose a case could be made that this bet here, which is representing like basically an ace or an 8, you could say maybe once in a great while a guy might fold an ace. But let's say that we weren't privy to that information. For the most part, from what I had seen at this level, I don't really think that anyone is folding an ace here. You just live to see another day in this particular spot just because he doesn't even bet that small. He bet like half the size of the pot. Just because somebody comes out and bets and then maybe you fold and, you figure out that they had a Broadway hand like this that they should never have called with. You just live to see another day because the times that they're going to have ace X or an 8 are vastly going to outnumber the times that they're going to be check calling with air on the flop. And the only time I would ever consider raising here is if I thought someone was capable of bet folding an ace. For the most part, that's not a great approach to this game. Plus, he's going to have some 8x, some slow played 8x, or maybe like pocket 3s, pocket 5s that he check called with to your bet. So there's just really absolutely no way that I'm going to really continue on here. Now, if I thought that he was somehow like bluff heavy enough where he was calling with absolutely nothing on the flop, I think a case could be made that King Jack off would be strong enough to call with. This is not like having, say, 6-7 suited where you have to raise or fold. You can't win at showdown. If he has some sort of Broadway or some sort of hand, like the first dude with like 9-10 that he's just calling with like as a backdoor, you beat those hands. So and the only difference would be is if he was like betting like deuce or something that he was turning into a bluff, which I don't really think is going to be in this particular scenario. So I actually like calling more here than raising. I mean, I know that we can see the cards, but that's the truth. And the reason why I don't like raising is because I don't expect a bet fold here from an ace, even though he's not going to really have a big ace, and he is going to have some 8x. So you don't need to risk the money by raising here. So I think that this is a little bit strange here from Joe. And the line itself is really bizarre. Like, he bet the flop, checked back the turn, and now he's raising the river. Like, what does he ever do that with? You know what I mean? We're never really doing that. Not that this guy is necessarily paying attention, but even some recreationals will realize, like, if they have an ace, it's less likely that my opponent's going to have aces full, which might be once in a while a line that somebody might take. They're going to c-bet the flop, check back the turn, and raise the river. I would have a very, very hard time folding if somehow I was in Lee's position and I had called with a weak ace out of the big blind in a single raise pot and it went check, check on turn and then I bet the river, when the fact is that aces up doesn't play. Like, it's one thing if the river was like a jack or a queen and ace jack, ace queen beat any other ace here. I mean, if somebody ran into ace 5, it doesn't matter. It's playing the board. And also too, with a jack, a 10, or a queen coming, they could have those pairs in their hand that are now full. So it would have made a lot more sense if it was an overcard to an 8 where there's at least something credible that goes bet, check, raise. Somebody backed into something. But on a low card like this, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's just kind of funny that he has the best hand anyways. And again, it's just really weighing in. If you think a guy is full of shit and he's not turning hands into bluffs, then a strong king high can be a call. I think a more sort of relatable example would be if there was a flush draw, like say it was ace 8-8 with like a couple clubs, and we bet king jack, and the guy check called, and the turn was a 3, it went check check, and the river was a brick, and the guy bet. Well, you can obviously see that you can call here with king jack. So there isn't really much of a difference because you're trying to beat up the busted flush draws, right? Or some sort of other connecting type of board too, something like that. So this one doesn't make a ton of sense to me. All right, next hand here, and we are going to do a blackout job here for this hand because I want to demonstrate something that kind of comes right out of small stakes exploit guide about river play. So in this particular situation here, our hero is once again going to have queen 10 suited here. So we get a raise it up here to 25 by a mystery hand on the button. This guy, Mr. Binkles. And hero is in the big blind, and this is going to be a heads up scenario. So it was a straight 5x open, and I don't mind just the call here. I mean, if somebody called in between, you could certainly start to squeeze out this hand against a button open. But against a 5x open, I mean, maybe you sometimes mix in a 3-bet, sometimes call, but heads up, I'd be probably more likely to call against a large open, depending on sort of how the guy plays and things like that. So here we are the hero, and we've got top pair, and it quickly goes check check. So queen 9-4, a couple clubs, and a quick check check. Turn now is the jack of diamonds, which shouldn't really change a whole lot in terms of the button's check back range. I do like a value bet here. We're open-ended with top pair. I think that king 10, which is obviously a straight now, is probably going to be doing a fair amount of betting on the flop, as is 8-10. The only thing that you're going to really run into here is if, the guy's was checking back like pocket jacks, or he had a hand like jack 9 that he checked back for that now turns sort of 2-pair in a given scenario, or he was just straight slow playing something, big on the flop. And of course we block pocket queen, so it'd have to be 9s or 4s. So I would like to, get a call here. So I wouldn't go super large, but because the pot is small, in small stakes, no limit, we sort of think about the actual size of the pot as opposed to a percentage. So even if I came out and bet 35 here, even though that's 2/3 the size of the pot, it's not really treated as 2/3 the size of the pot, I feel like, because the pot is so small. Whereas when the pot gets larger and larger, you're really looking more towards the absolute size of the pot. Kind of the same thing as when it's small, but it works the other way, where large bets or 500 to 1,000 looks like a very strong hand, not just 50% of the pot. So our hero Joe does come out, and he bets 30 into 52, and now this guy raises it up here to 80. So 30 to 80, almost kind of like a little bit of a stop raise. It's not quite 3x, and sometimes you might see this, although I would tend to think it would be less likely from the button, but occasionally you'll see a guy like check back top pair or check back at over pair and bump up the turn or something like that, something to that manner. But for the most part, queen 10 here is most likely not going to be the best hand. Now let's take a look though at turn pot odds, because at this point it's going to be like 162 and it's only going to be like 55 to call. So our hero is getting like something like 3-1 here. Is getting about 3-1, and if a queen comes off, if a 10 comes off, it might still go check check. I mean, if you knew the guy had a set or had something else where your trips and your 2-pair would be no good, then you wouldn't quite have the direct equity to call because you only have 8 outs, and you would probably need about 4.5 to 1. But could you actually still make some money at the end if the guy did have a set and a one-liner came out and he possibly put you on like busted clubs, something like that? Because really 4.5 to 1 off of a $55 raise, you're only going to make about 225 off of that raise. The pot, you're calling right now to make 162. So the question is, can you bet $60 into 225 or $60 into what will be about 212? And sometimes the answer is yes when there's a front door flush draw out there. So for all those reasons, I would definitely call here if I was the hero. even just with the open-ended. And now the river here is the 5 of clubs. So a couple things going on here before we do a reveal. Number one, I would probably not bluff this card as much when the turn is raised. Now, the times that you might be able to bluff this card is really if the turn was like a really small mini raise, but I think 80 is a little bit in between. I don't want to bluff this card because I'm not interested in trying to bluff, recreational players off of sets, off of 2-pair types of holdings. They're going to convince themselves and call. But this river will get, go check a fair amount. For the same reasons, though, if a one-liner did come out, and I'm not talking about a 10, in a 10 I would probably be content to go check because we're still losing to like Queen Jack. I mean, we're beating Jack 9, but that's about it. We're losing to sets. But if the river came out a king, or if the river came out an 8, you absolutely have to lead, because there are certainly going to be hands that are going to call you. They're going to check it back. People at this level who are poor players are showdown monkeys. It would not surprise me even if a guy checked back a hand as strong as 10-8 or King 10 here or a set. So if I made a straight with a one-liner, you have to lead. You cannot depend on your opponent betting. And if it was a club, even more so, you have to lead. We wouldn't have to worry about our opponent having a front door flush, I don't think, really, with the line taken, because he's going to bet off the flop most of the time. He's not checking back and then raising the turn with a club draw. So if the king of clubs came or the 8 of clubs, it's a mandatory bet. But even if an offsuit king or an offsuit 8 came, if you're playing against a good player once in a while, you can go for a check at the end and have them, bet small or, get them to value own themselves. But then the question is, are they going to call a check raise? The only time that would be better than just leading is if you could get them to value own themselves and they call a check raise. But at this level, you got to bet your hand when you make it, I feel like, from out of position on the river, because people are such showdown monkeys. They're going to check back. But on the flip side, I'm actually not going to sort of use a club as a bluff card here after I get raised on the turn, when raising is usually indicative of better than one pair at the recreational levels on the turn. Now, you can get away with using a flush card as a bluff if there wasn't a raise on the turn. If you just went check call, then I think you can get away with it. But when they raise the turn, it's really indicative of quite some strength. And our hero does quickly check, and it gets checked back, and we do a reveal here. And this is exactly what I'm talking about here with Jack. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And this is, it's a good non-bluff by our hero here, Joe. But the reason why I picked this one up is if he did make the straight, you must lead here on the river. All right, a couple hands later, this is at 219. And this is another spot having to do with a turn double barrel, but this time whether or not you want to do it for value. So it gets folded over to our hero, who opens to 4x to 20 from the button, and he's got King 7 of clubs. This guy here, Pete, in the small blind, calls, and that is something that you will commonly see sort of at the lower stakes, even though he is pretty short, which actually gives him an incentive, I think, to 3-bet to 65 or 70. But you'll see a lot of people call in the small blind when they probably should be playing sort of a 3-bet or fold strategy. And this guy, Don, here comes in with ace-6 of clubs as well. So our hero, Joe, here is on the button, and he flops top pair. So it's 7-4-3 here with a couple of hearts. He's obviously flopped top pair. There's multiple straight draws out there, and certainly the big blind can be fairly wide. But if you were ever considering checking some hands here, then you would want to do that against aware players if you were raising from earlier position where you were not as wide. Because if you're opening under the gun in a 9-handed game, this board's not going to hit you at all. But if you're on the button and you're opening 40% of hands, it certainly can hit you. So you get to do more betting. But I would never consider checking back over pairs or anything, even good top pairs in a game like this from what I saw. So Joe goes to 40 here into 60, so he takes a 2/3 sizing, which I think is fine. I mean, if somebody raised here and put pressure on him, you could just bet fold, King 7. And Don here is going to make the call with a gut shot here to a 5 and ace high with ace-6 of clubs. So the pot is 140. And the turn's a queen. So the turn here is an offsuit queen, and this is just a little spot that I think some people will miss. If you have like a hand like, for example, a 7, whether it's king 7, 8 7, 9 7, 10 7, but it makes it a lot easier when you have a good 7, like ace 7 or king 7 here. When you get a disconnected high card, especially on a draw heavy board like this, that does not connect with the board, by all means bet the turn. And you can evaluate, sometimes you can even go for 3 streets, but I like a bet here on the turn on a disconnected high card when you have top pair on a board like this in a wide configuration. Are you sometimes going to run into queen X of hearts? Sure, you'll sometimes run into queen X of hearts. You're going to sometimes run into a random queens up hand, yes, but still, you still favor to be way, way out in front here against any 7, a 4, or a 3. You don't have to take huge sizing. I mean, you could bet like 50 or 60, and it puts your opponent sort of in a very difficult spot because they think that you might be using that disconnected high card as a barrel card. I mean, I don't think I would choose with this specific hand to like overbet turn or bet full pot on turn with king 7, but I think I would use that type of sizing. So Joe decides to check it back. So I wasn't a fan of some of the double barrels, but I think he missed one here for value. So he decides to check it back. Pot still is 140, and now the river's a deuce. And Don is going to think about this one for a long time. Now, again, straight out of sort of small stakes exploit, if you do check back turn and you see disconnect, or if you check back on the turn and you see a disconnected high river, or in this case, you see a disconnected high turn, and then your opponent comes out and leads, you're going to have to be very, very wide in calling here. Like, if I had any type of showdown value, I feel like here, I'm going to call. It's even more extreme if the turn was like a deuce and the river was a queen, although 5-6 comes in. But you can go to small stakes exploits and look at, calling down on rivers very, very wide on disconnected high card runouts, especially if it came 7-3-4 bet call, turn was like a king, check check, river was a queen, and then all of a sudden like the big blind comes out and bets, because that's really only going to be 2 pair plus for value there, or a busted draw. You can be very wide in calling when disconnected high cards come out and somebody without the betting lead comes out and bets the river, especially if there's 2 of them, right? But that does not happen here. That does not happen. Don thinks about it for a long time, and he finally checks. And I have to say, if I'm not going to bet the turn here with king 7, I'm going to bet the river. And I think you're going to get called. Now, you might not get called here by ace high, but once in a while you might. But if your opponent has a 4 or a 3, and this line was taken, and you didn't bet the turn, I would absolutely bet the river here with king 7. So there was some lost value here. Most of the time I'm betting turn, and if I get called, I might even put a very small value bet on the river, depending on how bad I think that the player is, because I beat all 7x. If I had a hand like 8-7, maybe I bet turn and check back river because I'm losing to other 7s. But specifically with like king 7 and ace 7, I might even go 3 streets here. But if I do check back turn, I'm definitely betting the river when nothing changes at all. Like I said, I don't know if necessarily that guy would have called with ace 6, but we don't really want to be super, super results oriented in a spot like that. So rolling on here, this is going to be the second to last hand that we take a look at here from our hero Joe. This is at 3 hours and 45 minutes into this particular episode, and you can see that Joe picks up pocket 10s in the big blind, and we've got a hijack raise, and Joe's going to 3-bet here, so 30 to 100, which I think is fine. I think you can go a little bit larger, maybe 4x this deep, and they are deep. They're 200 big blinds deep from out of position. So I might have gone a little bit larger with 10s, but definitely a raise for value here for sure. And Don here is going to defend. I mean, pretty reasonable with ace 4 suited, unless someone 3-betting out of the big blind is only have like aces, kings, and ace king. Then you can start to make very, very exploitable folds in a given situation. And it's not really the best flop here for Joe. And what I will say here is you start to see some, I would say, range bets come into play. And I always point back to some of the fast track stuff, like what is a range bet and how does betting your entire range on certain boards show a bet, a higher expectation. It's because it will allow you to realize your equity a little bit more, where if you check whether it's out of position or in position and face a bet, or check back in position and then face a bet on the turn, you don't get to realize as many cards in a given scenario. And tens actually needs a little bit of protection here from hands that just randomly have like a queen or a jack in it. So I would probably be doing more, I would say, protection betting with some of these smaller pairs, actually, eights, nines, and it can be really small, and then you can just check the turn. And you can absolutely get called by Broadway types of draws. So eights and nines can get called by all those Broadway types of draws, like the queen jack, the king 10. Having tens blocks them a little bit, but you're not blocking necessarily queen jack, and your hand does need a little bit of protection. And usually people don't just come out and then just suddenly, I mean, I think the more important thing here is that if you check, people don't usually suddenly come out and start bluffing. Like if I were going to check on a board like this, I might even consider check folding depending on sizing, because field callers to three bets aren't going to just suddenly come out and bluff this board when they're petrified of you holding ace king. So I might still put in a small c bet here, but it goes check check. You can see Don checks back an ace here. So now it's going to get worse and worse here for Joe, obviously. And I think at this point, probably if my opponent bets, I would just probably give it up, because he's going to have to start to find some bluffs that people at this level really don't find, like starting to turn fours and fives into a bluff, betting some sort of suited connector that had absolutely no showdown value, like 5-6 suited, into a bluff, something like that, specifically trying to get the preflop three better to like fold out like queen queen or 10-10. And check check again. And now the river here is an ace. So the board gets double paired, and Joe checks it once more here. So his hand plays the board. It is ace, ace, king, king with a jack out there. And I can sort of see, if you were in Joe's spot, as Don here is going to come out and bet 150, I can sort of see, if you're in Joe's spot, like, what is this guy like betting here? Like, is he betting, he never bet the flop. Does he have a king? He probably doesn't have a king. He's probably going to at least bet the turn. Does he have an ace? Maybe once in a while, but it's less likely that an ace is out there. Does he have a counterfeit pair? Does he have absolutely nothing? The issue, though, is that this is laying a price. So going, if you ever watch my double board PLO or Crush Live, Crushing Live Omaha 8, the high-low section, you are going to lay a price here to chop, meaning that this guy's betting 150 into 200. So you're calling 150 to win 100 here. You have to lay a price. It's not quite 1 to 2. It's about 1 to like 1.5. If you bet full pot, you'd be calling 200 to win 100, and you'd have to be right 66% of the time. This probably you need to be right about 60% of the time here. If he had bet half pot and it was 100 to 100, you have to be right 50% of the time. So here, you've got to be good here 60% of the time to call for this chop. And there just are players that aren't going to throw out this type of money here with a bluff. So, whether it's right or wrong, I just kind of wanted to go over the math of it. Obviously, would be slightly better if he had queen, queen, because if he has queen, queen, the guy's bluffing, you win. But here, you are just playing the board. So I may tend to just give this one up, because the other thing too is that if your opponent can recognize that he's playing the board here as well, it's not like it's king king ace ace deuce or king king ace ace 3, where if a guy has 6-7 suited, he thinks he's not going to win. Here he's chopping with any hand that doesn't have an ace, a king, or a queen in it, right? Chopping with any hand besides like jack jack. So whenever your opponent, I feel like, has a chance to chop the board by checking, it's a little bit of an underbluff spot, because he can sometimes chop. So why is he throwing it out? As opposed to, like I said, ace, king, king, ace, king, king, jack, or excuse me, like ace, king, king, ace, like 4 or something like that. So for those reasons, I probably would have given up on this one here, thinking that I'm actually not going to chop 60% of the time. I can sort of see maybe what Joe was thinking, but this sort of comes with experience and hand reading, that your opponent, if they have a chance to chop, probably aren't going to try to get you off of a chop. Of course, I always preach that you should do that from Crush Live Poker, but we're talking about other players that we're trying to extract value from. So Joe makes the call and he gets value towned a little bit. So last hand here from Joe, and this is just sort of pure max value. I mean, with the stack sizes, it's definitely not complicated, but we can take a look at this if we were even deeper. And what does a sort of check call lead river scenario represent from our opponent? So Joe here on the button has ace nine of diamonds and going to have a limp in, and of course Joe's going to make it 25, like the play. Small blind here, Pete off of just 700 calls with 10-4 diamonds. I mean, isn't this just amazing? And this other guy limp folds, so now they're heads up. It's just crazy, right? Just absolutely crazy. So king deuce 8 with a couple diamonds, so Joe's got the nut flush draw here. A pretty good board. A lot of people are just going to fold out unless they have a king, something like that. I would start building here, to be honest, and I very well might double barrel. I mean, this is one where I don't have an issue double barreling because when heads up, just because somebody calls a bet doesn't mean that they always have a king and they might fold off on turn. Now, if I bet here, call, and then bet like the 3 of clubs, 2/3, and then call again, I very well might just give up with ace high. Sometimes you're going to win against lower diamond draws that aren't paired, but this is a lot different than like ace 6-6 rainbow, like we were talking about at the lead of this particular video. So Pete's going to check. By the way, you can see that both players have flush draws. Joe is going to bet 30, and we are going to get a call here from Pete, and a great card is going to come off here for the hero on the turn. It's a diamond. So Joe's got the nuts, the nut flush, and Pete has actually the third nut flush, losing to the ace and to the queen, but both players with 2 card flushes. And if I'm Pete, I'm just thinking, well, I hope this guy has a king, and I'd probably start to build, because at this point, I'm not overly, like 8x is going to fold out. So I would probably go close to pot here, because I still don't think a king is going to fold, and certainly king x without a diamond isn't going to fold. I would go at least 100 here, because I'm not trying to, it's an overcard to an 8. Slightly different than if the turn was like the 3 of diamonds, where you could make a case where you might want to try to dink and dunk extract from 8x, but that portion of his flop calling range is not calling anything now. So I'm going to go large and try to get max value from a king. So I would probably have gone a little bit larger here than what Joe did. I would have probably gone like 100, something like that, and then tried, go very large at the end here. So Pete just calls, by the way, here. So just a call. And you can see the difference, right? Like Pete calls in the pot now is 240, where if you had gone 100, it would have been like 320. So it starts to get exponentially larger, leading to like me betting 300 at the end. So now the river is going to come out a blank, just a total brick here. It is a 9. I mean, it brings in a straight, and now we're going to have Pete come out and lead the river. So check call, lead the river. And when you ever have the nuts in a situation like this, Pete has pretty much bet himself where this is just a no-brainer, because at this point, like if Joe calls, the pot's going to be, 670, and it's going to be less than a half pot size bet all in. So it's just a no-brainer all in. But let's say that Pete covered Joe, right, and took this line, and after the 215 he had another 900. I would 100% jam here, even if it was an overbet, up to a certain point, maybe even up to 2x. This line from a recreational player is very, very nutted, or it's somewhat bluffy. And or like they don't have a strong hand and they're not going to call raise anyways, which is probably unlikely given this line and this texture. So what I mean by this is that I would be shocked if this was like king 9. Of course, we block a 9. For the most part, this is also going to be whatever our opponent deems to be a big hand, like a flush, even though it's unlikely like we hold the flush, or he's just not calling any raise. So if he has a big hand where he's going to call like a super large raise, or he's not going to call any raise, and we have a nut hand, which size should we go with? We should go for the super large raise. So if he was much, much deeper, I'm taking up to a 2x jam here, holding ace nine of diamonds and just being like, all right, well, and sometimes guys will even convince themselves to call with even if they did have an in between hand. But this game just reminds me so much of like early commerce days in the early 2000 teens and late 2000s, even at 510. Obviously, the games have gotten tougher, but that was when there was just so much recreational money going around. And I would be one of the only regs that could identify a spot like this where when I was holding the nuts, based upon my opponent's line, I also knew that they had a very strong hand, or at least what they deemed to have a strong hand. And I would not, we'd be 1,500 or 2,000 back, and a guy would lead for 215. These other idiot regs would like raise to 500. I would move all in or close to all in and get absolute maximum value. If a guy raises to 500 from 200 and he gets called 100% of the time, he gets 300 in value. If I raise all into 2,000 and I get called 50% of the time, you can see how much more value I get. I would get called close to 100% of the time. No one was going to be folding a flush to me, but I did want to bring that up too as well. Well, by the way, obviously Pete is going to call, and he did, and that's a nice little hand for our hero Joe. All right, we're going to go over a couple more hands, and this is from a different night with a different subscriber who emailed me in, and this is from July 10th on the Jacksonville stream. And this is our hero right here, Deontay, who is in seat number 9. So we're going to go over a couple of hands, and he had asked a couple of questions about these hands as well. Again, I watched a clump of these hands. Wow, look at that guy's mask over there. I watched a clump of these hands, and there really wasn't, the level of play was really about the same. I mean, the games in Jacksonville are just insane. It's just unbelievably really good games. So in this particular hand, it appears as though there is a button straddle, although I don't remember them necessarily. I don't remember that about there's a button straddle here. So small blind goes first. Small blind limps in with queen, queen. And our buddy Deontay here, after several limps from up front, is going to ISO raise with ace queen. I would be going to, I was going to say at least to, if I opened a 35 in a straddle pot, 45, at least 55. He even went larger, which is fine. I mean, I always say, like, raise to the amount where you're going to get the dominated hands to call. He goes 75 here with ace queen. Deontay's been, I checked him out, he's been a long time subscriber to the site. Goes 75 from +1. And for whatever reason, the guy that limped in with queens out of the small blind does not limp re-raise. Absolutely amazing. He does not limp re-raise. This guy calls with king 9. This is what I'm talking about. I mean, Deontay went to 75 and he got called by 5-3 off. He got called by king 9, and he only got called by queen, queen. I mean, this is some special stuff here, right? So 310 to the flop, and it's king jack 3. And again, sort of my approach to these super loose games is very, very value oriented as a c-bet post flop, where I would probably be checking here in position a lot with ace queen. I mean, I know that you would have obviously a gut shot to the nuts. You have an overcard. People are calling with offsuit broadways, so you can't just say liberally go, like if people are playing correctly, that they don't have pocket kings, pocket jacks, and only a few combos of king jack suited for top 2, where you could blast a 2 Broadway board like this. Sometimes like we talk about. So for the most part, I would probably be doing a whole lot of checking here against 3 people in a super loose game and be very, very value oriented. Now that did not happen though. We've got this guy who leads here. So this dude from under the gun, he's going to lead for 65, which is a very, very small bet here from GG. And really the first inflection point for Deontay here is whether he wants to call or raise. Now, I like a much more dynamic board to pull some of these raises. This is the same types of things as attacking a limped pot, attacking a field better. We like those dynamic boards like 9-3 where top pair is going to change when I sometimes will raise a donk lead, Like if I had ace king of diamonds and the board came out 9 deuce 3 with like one diamond or something like that, or ace 4 suited on 9 deuce 3 with a backdoor and somebody leads, I might be doing a fair amount of raising there with my equity, and also knowing that the chances that 9x is going to hold on with what comes out is unlikely. Here, not as dynamic because king x is not going to change, right? Now, I don't know if Deontay knew how wide GG was, but if you were playing a normal range, he shouldn't really be in there with king 9, so it would usually represent king 10 or king queen as obviously top pair, or like a hand like queen 10. So I don't mind the call here, really. But it is somewhat interesting when a guy leads for like 1/5 the size of the pot. I mean, I don't think it would be terrible to pull it in a raise. You know, if you're going to raise with some ace queens, you'd want maybe a backdoor flush draw. So if you had like ace queen of clubs, ace queen of spades, something like that, right? So Deontay decides to call, and it's 85, excuse me, not 65. So it's 85. So Deontay calls, and this guy here in the small blind TN, one of the things that I will say is that this is, God, this just reminds me of all the patterns I used to pick up. If you ever watch old school Live at the Bike, I'm talking about 2005, 2006, I would see this all the time. There was a guy named Mo, not Mo the host, but this, we called, he was a skinny dude. And he loved to limp in with big pocket pairs. And he wouldn't get, you know, if he didn't get the limp re-raise, though, he just couldn't get away from like king on an ace-high board. He'd have to call once. I mean, this is bet and a call from the pre-flop raiser. Why are we overcalling with queen? Because the guy's emotionally attached to the fact that he might have the best hand here. And you can see that it's better to actually have, usually it's better to actually have a piece of the board. This is the same concept as better calling with 7-6 on king 7-3 versus a c bet, as opposed to say like pocket fives, because you have a chance to improve with a 5-out draw, whereas with a pocket pair in your hand lower than the board, if you're behind you only have 2 outs. So he makes the call. So now it's 565, and we roll the turn, which is a total brick here. As you can see, if you structure, you know, some ace queen suited raises against donk leads, you know, you would half the time pick up with a black ace queen a flush draw. So now queen checks, and this guy comes out and he bets once again, but he just bets super tiny, and it almost just appears like this guy has a weak king, so he goes 75. So this is this is really special, right? Because the dude's almost getting like 10-1. He's getting like 9-1 here. And if the guy has like king 10 or king queen, he has equity, right? With ace queen getting 9-1. I mean, he's got 22% equity here. I don't think there's anything wrong. If you were to, this is such an unorthodox line, I don't think there's anything wrong with what Deontay is about to do, which is picking up on this kind of really strange sizing where he's bet less. He bet less on the turn than he did on the flop. We talk about like getting raised and then somebody does the same bet. This dude's doing the same bet, but he led into the pre-flop raiser and he's doing same bet on the turn. This is never a strong hand. It's just really never a strong hand here. If he had made a more standard bet, I think you can look at the pot odds. Because there's a guy behind you, maybe you just fold. But this is just hopping on understanding sizing and betting patterns and putting sort of small stakes exploits really like into play. Again, I look at this just like if somebody check raised me on a, you know, on a king high board, and I called with aces, and then he made the same bet on the turn, I would just 100% know I have the best hand. Same bet or less. It's the exact same concept. So Deontay does decide to raise it up here to 250. Now, obviously, you got to watch stack sizes here too. And he only made it like 3x. It's one of these things where if you're going to pull a raise like this when you're sort of hopping on this sizing pattern, I think if you make it really small, not that he made it like tiny, but you kind of play a guessing game on the river. So however often you're in this spot and you want to bluff a guy based on like a weird sizing line, I actually tend to take one large size, meaning if I was Deontay in this spot, I might have gone to like 375 or 400, and then if he called, I would have given up. Because here at 250, it's a little bit of a guessing game as to how strong his hand is, because guys will call with just a weak top pair. Obviously, too, you have to be very, very aware of the fact that someone could have pair and picked up a flush draw. Now here it's not top pair picking up a flush draw. Here for someone to have top pair, pair plus a flush draw would have to be Jack X, which is probably unlikely. Obviously Deontay has the ace of clubs in his hand here too. That's my approach to these spots. This is not a common spot that happens in the games that I play in at the higher levels, but you might see it at the lower levels. But what I would say, once again, to repeat this, is that if you want to pick up and bluff a guy based on the pattern of sizing, I tend to do one large size on the turn and not go it's like 2.5 to 3x and then play a guessing game at the end. Because that's what's going to end up happening here. And this is what Deontay's question was to me about this particular hand. The guy finally folds. He finally folds queen, queen. And this guy's going to think about it for a long time. You can see he's 250 here for 900. I just don't know if you're going to get king, queen, king 10 to fold here with this sizing. Like, I think that those hands always continue on. And if he actually did have a hand that was actually stronger than that, now maybe you can always say maybe he doesn't. You don't know because the response is the same way. Like king jack might just call. So that's why I would maybe tend to go to 375 give up. So Deontay gets called. And now the river is an 8, which again is inconsequential. And now the guy checks, and it's just like, yeah, it's a guessing game. I mean, Deontay blocks the guy having king queen, which I would think would be one of the hands that he might have. I didn't know he was that far down with king 9, king 10. And because he used that sort of smaller sizing, we're sort of left in this spot where we don't know if we're going to burn off some money here at the end, because we don't actually know how strong the guy's hand is. If he is going to be continuing with all kings because of this small turn sizing, but also having some stronger hands. Deontay decides to blast all in. It's hard for me to be in this spot. Like I said, I would have gone a larger sizing on turn and giving up on the river. Instead here, Deontay goes all in. Let's just say that I'm not in the business of usually trying to run huge bluffs and get people off a top pair. Now, Mark Goon, on the flip side, says that, bluffing is the new value betting. And that could certainly be so as people are more aware and are sort of more close to the vest with their money and understand ranges. But this is not an LA game, meaning this is years and years behind. So I am very, very confident in saying, like, if you go to Jacksonville, most of your money is going to be made through pure value as opposed to running big bluffs, because it's just sort of an older school, no limit kind of setup. Deontay actually, this guy finally thinks about it, and then he finally gets it through. But I thought that was interesting. That was an interesting one. Now, the other hand from Deontay, I don't know if actually his name might be Carter. I saw the email. It's either Carter. I don't know if that's his last name. Maybe it's Carter. Sorry. Either Carter or Deontay. Is this hand here with pocket fours. You can see the V-pips. We crazier V-pips, right? See crazier V-pips in the Hustler game. Just a couple people in the 40s, some people in the 20s, but it just doesn't mean that the game's not soft, that's for sure. So let's call him Carter this hand. I'll get it one time, we'll get it right. So Carter raises up here with pocket fours, our hero from +2. And this dude flats with pocket jacks from the hijack. TN here, the dude that limped called with queens from before, calls with pocket fives. And we're going to see it 4 ways here. And Carter, our hero, flops a set. But he's got bottom set here. So one of the things that I would say is that obviously you have to be very, very aware when you flop bottom set on boards where there are straight possibilities. Now, this one is not as dangerous as a straight, smooth board like 4-5-6, because here we only have 6-8 and 6-3. On 4-5-6, we've got multiple more straights, right? More combinations of straights and more, I would say, combo draws that have equity against sets, because there's going to be more open-ended draws with flush draws. So that's just one thing of note. Obviously, I would be c-betting here. And again, this is a scenario where if someone was playing a optimal post-flop, but sort of trying to apply an optimal approach to this game against optimal ranges, even though their opponents are not playing optimal, this very well might be a check 100 spot from up front, because usually you're not going to be smashing this board, but you should be betting more volume of good hands, just like Small Stakes Exploits talks about. Lovely to have a set here, unblocking top pair on a draw heavy board. Carter comes out, and looks like he had bet more than 40. Let's see here in a second. I guess it is 40. I probably would have tended to take a slightly larger sizing. I just think you're going to get a lot of action on this board. I probably would have bet like 60, something like that. And unfortunately, you can see that Carter's set over set here. This dude calls with jacks, who did not 3-bet. And now TN here in the big blind is going to check raise. So he's going to check raise here to 135. So obviously the things that would be going at him right away here. The best case scenario is somehow if TN had 7-5 here, right? Or he had a combo draw, like ace-6 of clubs, something like that. But at this stack depth, they would definitely be a spew to put an extra bet in here. You can be overset, and obviously you can be up against a straight. Remember, TN called in the big blind, so he's getting a price. So he might have all the 6-8 offsuits. He could be 3-6 suited, things like that. And then you're up against, higher sets. So the way that I would 100% continue on here is with a call. By the way, this guy in the small blind called here too because he had top pair. So TN is check raising 3 people, a bet, a call, and a call. So that's fairly strong. I always get this. Carter is in seat 9. For some reason, the camera angle kind of always messes me up at the way that they do it with the seat numbers. Kind of messes me up. This guy's seat 6. The other guy's seat 4 is not in, he's over here, the guy with the 10-7. So I'm going to continue on here with a call. And that is what our hero Carter does. And then finally, Micah G is going to get out of there. Epic fold with Jack. This guy folds 7. And now we're at a 525. And obviously we have equity against straights. We have to be aware that we can be up. Is this guy still in here with Jack? I could have sworn he folded. Where is this guy with Jack? Seat 1. I don't think he's in there. Let's see. Wow, that is unbelievable. He called. This guy this guy called. I thought he was just a crazy. He called the c-bet, call. Guy c-bet, call, check raise call, and he calls with jacks. Unbelievable. And he's playing $1,300 deep. It is mind-blowing. You guys, anybody in Florida should run to this game. This is not an atypical game, by the way, that I see at Jacksonville. It's just crazy. So if we're Carter now, we do have this other guy behind us where we have to be. I think what that would make me think about is that it's more likely that Micah G has a draw here, and I think it probably leans TN towards more made hands. Just as a thought. Whereas if Micah, if he folded, which he should have, then TN's hand is a little bit less defined. Also, if TN continues to barrel, he's barreling on the turn against 2 people, not just one person, which I think is indicative that his hand is stronger and more jaded towards a made hand. So once that guy calls behind me, if I'm Carter, and this guy fires again, I'm like, all right, this guy's got a made hand here. Now, whether he could have a set or whether he still thinks 7-5 is a made hand. Now he bets 200, so it's a little bit in between. It's not quite like 135, same bet, but he's kind of a little bit in between here with the 200. So obviously I would still continue to call if I was if I was Carter, and that's what he did. Oh, and now Micah's gonna fold. Well, he can't beat the queen, so he folds. So now the pot's 925, and we roll the river, and it's the jack of clubs. So if TN checks, yeah, I'm gonna check behind, and I'm just gonna hope that I'm gonna win here. I don't think you need to turn a hand as strong as a set into a bluff in a given scenario to like try to get the guy off a straight. Remember, we're not trying to get guys off of big hands in this. Look at this game, right? This type of game. But what's interesting here, and the reason why Carter, I think, wanted me to take a look at this, was that this guy kind of sort of comes out and sort of blockishly bets 310. But I will go back to the fact that it's 310 into like 900. So even though it's 1/3 the size of the pot, it's still probably a fairly large bet for this game. So for the same reasons why I wouldn't turn my hand into a bluff here when check to, I'm probably not going to try to raise this guy off. I mean, sometimes people will be like, I want to raise like a block bet, right? The thing is that TN can once in a while still have like the nut flush draw, like ace-7 of clubs, and then make a flush here. So you're just kind of exposing your stack. So raising here, I think, would be a big mistake, even if it was a more extreme block bet. If a guy blocks the river here into 925, let's say he bets 150, I think 4-4 is still good enough to call down because you're going to still see some block bets that you beat. You don't need to turn 4-4 into a bluff here against a block bet. Now, as played, he's betting 1/3 the size of the pot, so we're getting 4-1. It kind of sucks, but when you're getting pot odds and you're up against bad players and you have a fairly strong hand, I'm not folding. So whether it's intentional or not, TN actually took a fairly good sizing here for a decent player because I do not fault Carter here at all for calling, and it's just a little bit of a cooler. But I think that it would be a mistake to try to. I mean, I think again, you don't want to be result oriented, and I think maybe Carter's like, oh man, I could have just raised this guy off the hand. Now, if you had like aces with the ace of clubs, and you didn't know that, for somehow you continued on this flop and continued on in the turn, and now all of a sudden the river, the guy bets like 1/3. And he can't have the nut flush, and you actually don't think that you possibly can be good because you can't beat anything given the line. Yeah, okay. But 4-4 still beats like 7-5. It still beats like queen-7 of clubs. Or actually, it doesn't beat queen-7 of clubs. I'm trying to think. What other two pair possible would be out there? It beats 4-5 too. It beats 7-4. There's a couple of things out there that 4-4 beats that aces doesn't. So I wouldn't take a hand as strong as that and turn it into a bluff against block sizing. But that's going to wrap it up for us, guys. I hope you liked this format. This is a fun couple hands. And like I said, I would run down to Jacksonville if you had the chance. Thanks for being subscribers, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.